Hey everybody, Dr. Shook here. I hope you're doing well today. It is Saturday night, 9 o'clock, June 22nd, 2019. So today what I want to talk about is over this past week, I had several like moments where I was like talking to someone. I was like, oh, this would be a great thing to talk about. This would be a great thing to share with you guys. And there was a case where I was working with, and I see this particular presentation quite a bit actually, working with a young lady, a woman who's 39 years old. She's about 5'5", about 210 pounds. And she's has a lot of issues with fatigue. Primary complaint. Well, let's say this. Her top complaint, number one complaint, is the fact that she can't lose weight, and she's tired, and she's growing facial hair. She's getting a lot of dark hair on her chin, and then around her lip here. She literally, when I observed closely, she's been shaving it, and she actually had, like, you could see the outline. I mean, you could see like the beard, and so we started talking, and we knew that when we started working together that she had been diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, I've talked about this some because I see it so much, because it is the most common endocrine problem in the United States for women. I mean, it's more common than thyroid problems. And so you always see people with problems that are together. I mean, no one ever comes into my office, or I never work with anyone that just has one problem. That's not what happens. That's just not how it works. You always have like layers of issues, right? You always do. Oh, there are always layers of issues. And so she has polycystic ovarian syndrome. And with PCOS, you tend to produce a lot of testosterone. Now, we could tell. I mean, we knew that. And then, seeing the face, the hair growth, increased, like really dark hair growth on her arms, like long dark hair on her arms. She had noticeable, like, large thigh, quadricep, and calf muscles, very, very large. So the increase in testosterone production too can actually, and with increased body weight like that, you'll see an increase in muscle mass. You can see that quite often. Now, she is considered pre-diabetic, and this is one of the main mechanisms behind the polycystic ovarian syndrome, the PCOS. Now, they told her that her thyroid was fine, but they didn't do a full workup on the thyroid. They just looked at TSH, which is typical. And so she was just telling me, she really wanted to lose weight. She was embarrassed by the facial hair and the dark hair growth. She had, I've seen this before, and I know I've mentioned this in a live stream. I can't remember if it was really recent, but she had these increased areas, like in the bend of her neck. I remember we looked, because I looked at her skin. I looked at her thyroid, but I looked around her neck, and like right here at the back of her neck, she had a darkening of the skin. She had that darkening of the skin on her elbows. She had darkening of the skin. It almost looked, so she was Caucasian, pretty light skin, and she had these areas of darkening, especially like at the at the bend of the elbow. Well, it was actually the neck, the elbow, under her arm, like here. She had darkening of the skin, and this is acanthus nigricans. Okay, it's where you see it a lot with insulin resistance and diabetes. Okay, so I was like, I could just see, I knew that there were all kinds of hormonal problems going on here, and when she knew that too, to a degree. She'd been that worked up for for PCOS anyway, and the doctors basically. Well, before I get there, she's 39, right? She's got all these issues, but she was telling me, like, we were talking, because when I do health histories, I gather so much data. It would really, people never ever fill out a history as in depth as what we ask. And it's for good reason, because that's how you have to do it if you want to do the best job possible. And so I knew, like, one of the areas of the intake of our questionnaires is like, what are your relationships like, right? Like, can we ask questions like relationship with your family, coworkers, boyfriend or spouse, right? And so there was no relationship there with boyfriend or spouse. And she shared this with me, that she, wanted to have a relationship, and she was really embarrassed by all this stuff. And I was like, and so I understand, and it's just, a tough thing for her. So, she'd been to her primary care doctor, who recognized some of the symptoms. They do basic enough workup to figure out that she was insulin resistant. They could see some of the changes, the characteristic changes, the increased the increased facial hair, growth of facial hair, and they had an idea. Your doctors, your primary care doctors, and nurse practitioners and physicians assistants, they can typically spot PCOS if they're in family practice, right? They can typically spot that, like, with no problem, because it's so rampant. The problem is that there are layers of problems here. Like, you typically see polycystic ovarian syndrome with diabetes or prediabetes, blood sugar dysregulation. And the question really becomes, well, what drives that blood sugar dysregulation? But anyway, we'll talk about that in a second with our plan, what we're going to do with her. So, went to her doctor. Her doctor basically said, look, they sent her for an ultrasound. She has cysts on her ovaries. She has insulin resistance. They told her she's pre-diabetic. Basically said you need to eat better and you need to exercise. And she does some walking, but she's really fatigued and worn out. And she's like, I don't know why I don't have any energy. And I was like, well, I was looking at her diet. There are a whole bunch of reasons here. I mean, there's just several reasons that her energy, her capacity to produce energy is not good. She has actually, the testosterone really does some pretty interesting things with your thyroid. So she's having all these challenges. The doctors basically put her on metformin, which to try and control her blood sugar and see because part of the mechanism behind, like, polycystic ovarian syndrome, these cysts, and there's some new research that's out there. I haven't looked at it in detail yet, but we know, one of the things that we know that definitely drives it is fluctuations in blood sugar, and especially surges in insulin and high insulin. So someone that has high blood sugar and that's insulin resistant tends to have high insulin. Okay. And so insulin's inflammatory, and it will drive it will change some enzymes in your hormone physiology, especially with your production of estrogen and testosterone in the ovaries. And it will increase an enzyme called 1720 lyase to a pretty high level. Okay, 17, the number 20 lyase. It will increase it because that's one of the things that insulin will do, and insulin's inflammatory. So anyway, controlling blood sugar. If you can bring the blood sugar down and you can lower the insulin, then you can have a favorable impact on these cysts. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to fix it or anything, but it might significantly improve it. So the doctors realized, well, we got to control our blood sugar. So they just basically said, listen, you need to exercise and you need to eat a better diet. and gave her metformin. So she tried some different diets. She tried keto, which I've seen ketogenic diets help people that have diabetes or insulin resistance. She just felt terrible when she did it. She had no energy. She was like, I felt good for a few days, and then I felt like I crashed, and I just couldn't make it out of it. And there were a few reasons for this around her thyroid, which we were able to identify, and it has to do with the high testosterone and the high insulin that she has. Those all affect thyroid hormone physiology, right? So if you have high insulin and you have a high inflammatory level, and the inflammation is causing you to produce more cortisol, because cortisol has anti-inflammatory effects. And if you have high testosterone, that disrupts your part of your thyroid hormone physiology too, the transportation. I'll go through that in just a second. But so there were several different issues that were occurring here with her, and she tried several things on her own, and she was just like, I don't know what's going on. It's not, from what I understand, I should be improving something like this, and I just want to try to figure out exactly what I need to do to the best of my ability. And so I had ideas, but we decided I had ideas and things that she could implement and do immediately that I talked to her about, but she wanted to do a little bit further investigation and testing. She wanted to look, because look, when you've got issues like this with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and you're looking at blood sugar, there are several different things that you really want to consider with blood sugar. Now, from a classic perspective, what the doctors will tend to do is just say, look, you need to exercise and eat a better diet. And they don't give them any really great guidance on diet. I mean, it is getting somewhat better. People are getting some information now, at least in some places. And then they'll tell them to exercise. And it's just like, find that on your own. And so she had tried some of those things. But what ends up happening with blood sugar is that, or let me say this, the biggest missing piece of the puzzle with diabetics, type 2 diabetics, right? Because that's what they were considering her. She was pre-diabetic. So that's like adult onset. It's typically due to it's typically thought to be due to poor diet, right? Lack of activity. The person becomes, they eat a diet of refined sugars and carbohydrates, and their blood sugar goes high. And they do that so frequently that their body their pancreas has to produce a lot of insulin to try to keep the blood sugar down. And maybe at first the body can do that, but then as they become more obese and their blood sugar stays higher for longer, their body becomes less sensitive to the insulin. So it takes more and more insulin to lower their blood sugar, and then therefore the insulin has to stay higher. And as they continue this diet that brings and raises blood sugar, they continue to have higher insulin, and the body just stops being sensitive to it. So now this person, they continue eating a bad diet, usually, and then they have high insulin, and that's the typical mechanism that the doctors are looking at, and that's what they're thinking. That's the thought process. So they're like, well, just don't do those things, right? Eat a better diet and exercise, and your body should change. Well, here's the problem. These are the big missing pieces. Well, first of all, I don't agree with most of the conventional wisdom on, and this is important that we talk about blood sugar in relationship to polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I'm going to tell you how the hormones produced, especially testosterone, has a negative impact on the thyroid, and how it impacted this young lady's, how it was impacting her energy levels and her really systemic physiology. But the doctors just look at it that way primarily. But the biggest missing pieces, and with PCOS, you almost always have to look at blood sugar. It's because insulin is usually the primary driving mechanism behind it. So the things that are missing from that is like, okay, diet. I agree. Yeah, you can't have a terrible diet. Exercise and movement, if you can do it, yeah, we need to start getting you doing some kind of movement if you can do it. But the two biggest missing pieces are inflammatory load. Okay, does she have a high inflammatory level? And cortisol, the stress hormone cortisol. right? So if we talk about inflammation first, so we already know diet and exercise are important to try and fix the underlying mechanisms that we believe are most commonly associated with polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? High sugar, high insulin, those types of issues. So when you start looking at the blood sugar issues, you've got to say, okay, well, if they have a high inflammatory load, it's going to be a problem. Okay, it's going to be a problem for blood sugar regulation. Okay, there's going to be a huge problem because if you've seen my other live streams when I talk specifically about inflammation, right? You know that inflammation does what? Whenever I could have a huge stack, give me every lab I want to look at in the world, every lab, and then what's the first thing I'm going to look at? I'm going to turn to the inflammatory markers and I'm going to look to see what their inflammatory load's like. And I'm going to do that because an active inflammatory process is going to create massive dysfunction systemically throughout the person's body. And one of the things that's going to occur is that it's going to dampen and blunt, basically decrease the cellular responsiveness to hormones. So it's going to blunt the cellular, her cells, her body's response to insulin. Okay. So we often talk about this in relationship to the thyroid. Hey, high inflammatory levels means that the body's not going to have good sensitivity to the thyroid hormone. So then you have the normal thyroid hormone quantity, but you have poor stimulation of the cell because of inflammation, right? Well, if we're talking about insulin, right? The same kind of thing can occur. You have decreased sensitivity to the insulin. So what does that sound like? It sounds like insulin resistance, right? It's already insulin resistance. Inflammatory levels can drive and contribute to that. But this is something that's not even considered. This is almost never considered. Like I've never really seen this considered in a medical workup. And it's not that the doctors, they're just not, that's not part of the workup yet. That's not part of the the treatment that they use. And so the inflammatory load's a big issue. So I knew we had to look at inflammatory load. And then we want to look at cortisol. Okay. Now we want to look at cortisol because cortisol is what? It's your primary stress hormone. And cortisol will go up when someone either has physical pain, emotional stress, or they have inflammation, right? Inflammation is actually a stressor. It's a chemical stressor. And the body will make cortisol because cortisol has anti-inflammatory effects, right? So what ends up happening though with high cortisol, guess what cortisol does? It raises blood sugar. Cortisol, when you're stressed, it raises blood sugar. Now, if you have listened to me talk in other videos, you know I talk about this a lot when people get low blood sugar. I say, look, what happens to you when you get low blood sugar? You'll get nauseous, you get shaky, right? You can get clammy, you can almost break out in a cold sweat. Those symptoms are due to the fact that your body's spiking cortisol and spiking adrenaline. And it does so because cortisol and adrenaline will signal your skeletal muscles, your large muscles, and your liver to break down stored blood sugar that's stored in those tissues and release it into the bloodstream to raise blood sugar. Okay, so think about this: if someone is struggling with blood sugar regulatory issues and they have high inflammation, which maybe is decreasing their body's sensitivity to insulin, okay, and the inflammation is driving an increase in cortisol production. And cortisol does what? Cortisol is diabetogenic. It contributes to diabetes. It will promote diabetes. You don't want high cortisol with diabetes. You don't want high cortisol at all. You just want it to be normal rhythm, normal quantity with what the body needs. You don't want it to be high though. So if it's high, you're going to have a greater stimulatory effect and release and breakdown of the sugars that are stored away in these tissues. And all those things contribute to higher blood sugar, less sensitivity to insulin, and they promote a lot of these symptoms. And they don't have very much to do with diet, very much to do with exercise. Okay? Not much. And this is the biggest gap I see in diabetes work. And I've worked with a lot of people that just have diabetes and hey, help me with my diabetes if you can. And that's what we look at what's going on with their body and we try to help them figure out how to address this diabetes thing, right? It's the same thing. It's a systems-based approach. You look at all the different pieces and you start focusing on improving them. So in her case, I know it's a long story, but you have to understand how these things are related. In her case, they weren't looking at these things. And so we ended up getting some testing done. Her inflammatory levels were high. They weren't sky high, but they were higher than we want to see them. So we knew that she had higher inflammatory load. She, her cortisol, so her cortisol levels as a whole, the total cortisol over a 24-hour period was elevated. So that made perfect sense. She had higher cortisol levels. She had a higher inflammatory load. All these things were working against her mechanistically, like just biochemically, it was working against her. So we had to ask ourselves, well, where's the inflammation coming from? Well, that was a question that, when I do workup, I often just get testing done to help us answer a lot of those questions if, at the time the test results come in, we already have some data to help us answer some of those questions. And so we did, but we saw higher inflammatory load, higher total cortisol. Her cortisol rhythm was off, which you'll see that happen sometimes. Your body will produce cortisol in a normal rhythm over a 24-hour period, and her rhythm was off. That's actually a brain-based mechanism that controls that rhythm. And then her testosterone levels were her free testosterone. Her free testosterone was elevated. Okay, so just like your body, when we talk about the thyroid, you've got thyroid hormone that's bound to a little carrier protein in the blood. Okay, that is by far the majority of the hormone in the body is bound to proteins in the blood. Very little hormone, very, very little of all your hormones are actually free floating for the tissues to use. Most of the hormone that you have in circulation is bound to these little proteins. So that's important to understand too. It's a really important thing to understand. Her testosterone levels were higher, but she had pretty high free testosterone levels, because it's pretty interesting what elevations of like testosterone and elevations of estrogens will do to your transportation mechanisms, to these little carrier proteins in the blood, right? Because remember, every hormone has 4 phases, right? There's production of the hormone, so you have the quantity. There's transportation of the hormone, so can it get where it needs to go? Are the little carrier proteins that carry it through the blood, are they dysfunctional? Then you have to have sensitivity at the cell, so do you have cellular responsiveness to the hormone? And then can you detoxify and break it down and eliminate it? And that's a bigger issue. The biggest issue with detoxification, as I understand it today, is really estrogens are our biggest concern there, as far as I'm aware of. You don't see as much of an issue with that with the thyroid, but in her case, we had higher testosterone, and so and higher free testosterone. So and I want to make sure I'm keeping this organized for you in my thoughts here. We had some testing on her. We knew there were several things that were going on here, right? High inflammatory load that wasn't acknowledged, higher cortisol that was not understood, that doctors, they don't check for that. That's not part of the workup. They're as far as they're concerned, like they don't even, like, what do I do about that? They're not sure, and that's okay. I don't expect them to know. They're fulfilling a really important job and helping her in other ways, and that's why we make a good team. We can complement one another here, and their cortisol levels were high and altered. Her testosterone levels were high. Now, this is where it got interesting, because I also check every single person I work with. If we're going to do blood work, I do a full thyroid panel. Because why do I do, I look at 10 different thyroid markers. I check for antibodies, because Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition, is the most common autoimmune condition in the United States, in industrialized countries. And the thyroid sets the metabolic rate for all cells, right? It sets the rate of every cell, of every gland, right? If you don't have thyroid hormone in physiology's breaking down, or quantity's not good, you're going to have some issues. You're going to have some problems with just systemic physiology working normally. Right. So we want to look at those things and cast a wide net, so we can survey that physiology and not be wondering if we're missing something. Right. So we checked her thyroid hormones out, and it was interesting because what she ended up having, her levels were technically normal. Her TSH level, which is what most doctors look at, right? And if TSH is high, then they think that your body needs thyroid hormone, because it's a stimulating hormone. It's called thyroid stimulating hormone. And so TSH's job is to stimulate the thyroid to make more hormone. So if TSH is high, doctors are like, wow, the body needs hormone. It's because TSH is made by the pituitary gland, which is a brain-based gland. And they're like, well, the brain's trying to tell the thyroid to make hormone, but it's not being made. But her TSH was pretty good, actually. I mean, it was like, we would be within the ideal. Like, so when I look at lab ranges, most of the lab ranges, we'll have like what we think is a range that's more narrow than the lab range, which is more representative of ideal human physiology. And so I'm always trying to compare, like, okay, where does a person fall in the lab range, and where do they fall within like our ideal ranges? And she was actually within ideal, but that's only TSH, right? And then I knew that there was high testosterone. So anytime the testosterone's high, what you'll tend to see happen is that the little carrier proteins in the blood that carry your thyroid hormone, they'll tend to drop, and the person will tend to have higher free hormones, like free T3, for example, will be higher. And hers was. She almost had lab high free T3. Now, one of the problems that arises here, some people are like, wow, that sounds great. Nothing's great to be high. Nothing's great to be low. Everything is at all of your hormone levels, and you want all your physiology to be just right. You want it to be just where it needs to be, and not any higher and not any lower. Okay. It's not like, it doesn't work like that. So she had these higher free T3 levels, like almost lab high, and she was tired. She was fatigued. Okay. So you can't, it's not all related. I'll just say this. It's not all of her fatigue is not all related to the thyroid. Okay. She has plenty of other reasons, with cortisol issues, with an inability to properly use her blood sugar, not being able, she's insulin resistant, blood sugar's high. She can't get it into the cells of her body to use it to produce energy. She's got a lot of energy production problems that are going on. So, but this, one of the things that can occur here and you'll see this in cases like PCOS. You see it in cases where, someone's taking testosterone. I see this in men sometimes where they'll take testosterone. What will happen here is that the free testosterone, the free thyroid hormone being a little bit higher due to elevated testosterone levels, because remember, what happens is the elevated testosterone can disrupt and cause your transport proteins to go down a bit, your thyroid transport proteins. So that means you have more free-floating thyroid hormone, which is what's going to be available for the cells of the body to use. Now, it sounds good until you have a similar mechanism that occurs with insulin resistance, right? I just talked about insulin resistance and how high insulin over a period of time, the body stops responding to it, right? That's why they call it insulin resistance, because you become resistant to it. And what you want with insulin is with all hormones is to have good sensitivity. So when the levels of the hormone go up, the body responds to it appropriately and quickly. You don't want it to have to go up and go up and go up and go up, because what happens is when you flood the body with a hormone, the cells of the body will respond to that hormone. But if you keep an elevated level of the hormone in the presence of the cell for a long period of time, you get loss of sensitivity. It's called resistance. Okay. So with her, what was happening, this is the mechanism I think is occurring, is that one of the mechanisms is that she's actually flooding the cells with its enough thyroid hormone that it's kind of like, think about like taking a pitcher of water and you're watering plants, but you flood the plant and it just pours over the pot. Well, the plant can't take that up, right? So you're doing that kind of to the body. That's happening to the body, and the body, that just like the plant goes, whoa, I can't drink this, and it stops. It's not going to take any more up. The body will become, and it will down regulate its responsiveness to the hormone. So that's one of the things that's happening. So the hormone levels actually look good. You would think that this is great, but you've got to have an appreciation for the other systems of the body and how they have an impact on everything that's going on here. So you see, she'll probably feel better. She'll probably feel better if we can get her blood sugar better under control by addressing inflammation and cortisol rhythm, by changing her diet a bit, by getting some gentle movement in, and lowering her cortisol, which is driving an increased release of blood sugar. lowering her inflammation, which is driving an increase in cortisol and making her less sensitive to the insulin that's already in circulation. Right? We're going to affect and impact the mechanisms with the blood sugar that are driving her insulin higher, which is causing her to have an increased production of testosterone, right? Due to the higher insulin drives this enzyme I mentioned earlier, drives the quantity of it up, and she's over converting, she's aromatizing, she's making testosterone at a higher rate. So if we can address the insulin levels and the blood sugar and bring those down, then we should be able to see, if the testosterone levels will decrease, then we should be able to see a balancing of the thyroid, where she doesn't have so much free T3 in circulation that's flooding her cells, and she'll actually have better responsiveness because she won't be flooding the cells, and the cells will be more responsive to the hormone in circulation, right? She's actually probably got a little bit too much there, just due to the fact that she's flooding the body because of the testosterone, right? And the testosterone disrupts the thyroid hormone binding proteins that carry the hormone through the bloodstream. Okay, estrogen does just the opposite thing, and that's more. It's really more common to see the estrogen issues with people, but with PCOS, this is a real common one that you'll see. So we saw that with her thyroid. She does have Hashimoto's. She had antibodies to TPO, but she's in a very early stage. So she doesn't have Hashimoto's. She would actually be considered euthyroid, which means normal thyroid levels. And you could say euthyroid Hashimoto's. You could say you have an autoimmune thyroid condition, but you're euthyroid at this point. You know, a lot of different ways to word it, but it's not technically Hashimoto's unless you're hypothyroid. Okay, unless you have low thyroid output. But those antibodies are predictive of the tissue failure in the future if you don't do something to dampen that autoimmune process. So everything that we're doing is working. It's we're taking our strategy is to address the priorities and change your diet in such a way that we remove things that drive foods that are driving an immunological response. We are doing some other testing with her based on what we found to further work up the immune system, because we want to try to understand what is the immune system reacting to. So we're looking at antibodies in the blood to foods, to pathogens, to chemicals, and we're going deeper there to try and be specific with what we're removing from her diet and her environment to try and dampen the immune response so that we can work with the autoimmunity. And that will help, if we can do that, and if that helps us to lower the inflammatory load, then we get improved sensitivity to insulin and everything, right? It all is connected. So, we're hoping that through these strategies that we have, that we're going to be able to really help her with this. And I think she'll do really well with it. I do. It's just one of those things where, I see this particular problem a lot, and it comes back to, there's some other things here that I should mention. Like, we're very curious today. I'm very curious about endocrine disrupting chemicals, agricultural and industrial chemicals, and their impact on our ability to use and have sensitivity to insulin. So many of these chemicals that are being used in industry are they mimic estrogens. There's just so many unknowns with chemicals. And so I'm not exactly sure how much of a role that's playing, but, it doesn't matter. I mean, everything, when I'm working with someone, I'm always thinking of those things. I'm always thinking, how do we reduce all of these potential issues too? Like, exposure to these chemicals. Is there anything that, I teach all that stuff as part of just the process, because you need those. I think those are all things that are really important. I think those are things that are dangerous to our health, so I try to teach that. But I think those can also have, anytime you're dealing with endocrine problems, you've got to look at endocrine disrupting compounds and chemicals. And I think there's a lot of stuff in our environment that's endocrine disrupting, a lot of stuff. Like I said, industrial chemicals that are being used, something like 85,000. It is unbelievable. And we just really don't know how this stuff that's in our air, water, and everywhere is impacting us. So this was a really, this is a really, this is a significant case because there are a lot of people with polycystic ovarian syndrome, a lot of people, and they are suffering and they're being told the same thing, that, diet and exercise, and they're put on these medications, and it takes some work. It does take some work, but I mean, I don't know how else to do it. There's not a pill that you can take that fixes that. There are these underlying mechanisms that we have to address, and I think that if we acknowledge it and you understand how these systems and things are interconnected, you can make a really significant difference in your life, or someone that know's life, by looking at this more comprehensively and saying, you know what, there's more to this than just this diet, this blood sugar component, but it is a very significant piece. So anyway, hope you all are doing well. So we have a few people on here. Let's see. I'm not going to stay on here too late tonight. But I'll see if I can maybe answer some questions. Yeah, Natasha says, "Hey, fish oils for inflammation." Yeah, fish oils are definitely something that I'll use. I'll use oils typically very high in EPA with inflammation. Curcumin, Alicia, can be good. I do use curcumin and resveratrol in combination sometimes for inflammation at high doses to help break some inflammatory loops that can occur in the body. Inflammation drives further inflammation, and you'll see that you can get in what's called like these self-amplifying loops, and you can break it. You just there's a saying that I say this to people that I work with quite often that have high inflammation. I'll put them on high doses of some of these things for a week or so, or sometimes longer, but usually it's like a week or so. And I'll tell them, it takes more water to put the fire out than it does to keep it out. So we use higher doses in the beginning, typically with inflammatory issues. But I will say this, you always have to remember that inflammation is a natural process, right? The body does it naturally, and it's doing it for a reason. So is it wise to just come in and take a whole bunch of anti-inflammatories? You need to know why the inflammation is there, right? That's the thing, is like, well, okay, what's driving the inflammatory response? Because if it were some kind of infection, then you want the inflammatory process to occur to a degree so that it can help kill the infection, right? That's the immune response. So we don't just want, that's why when people ask me a lot of questions about like, oh, what do I take for this? Well, the first thing that you want to really consider doing is figuring out why you're having the problems that you're having. That's what you really want to do, because otherwise there's a lot of guesswork going on, and that's not the smartest thing to do. Okay. It's not, you waste time, you waste money, and you might be doing something that's it depends on what's happening with you, but it's always good to have more information, have a better starting point than just taking a bunch of supplements. Okay. I don't think that we really should have to take supplements our entire life. Okay. I mean, I don't think that that's something that we should have to do. Supplements too are, they're man-made. I mean, we made those. I really don't, I don't think that they're necessarily things that we need to take forever. We should always strive to take less, to get better food, to eat better, to interact with our environment more naturally. That's really what we should strive for. I mean, do I take vitamins and supplements every day? Yeah, I do. But I'm not taking them necessarily for just foundational, like basic vitamin and mineral needs. I do spurt dose a multivitamin, but I'll take them for cognition, performance enhancement, and things I'm like trying to see how it changes my biochemistry, like with exercise, stress response, focus, experimenting with like longevity will help me with longevity. Some things I take that I think we think are beneficial for like longevity. So yeah, there's several things. So Tracy says, "Hey, I'm losing muscle mass." Man, there's a bunch of reasons for that, Tracy. A whole bunch of reasons. I'm sorry that you're losing that. Let's see. Hey, Rebecca. Thyroid Symptoms. Hi, thank you. I'm glad the videos you enjoy the videos. I hope they help you out. Out of whack, help me. I think it's Bay Armstrong says I had a full thyroidectomy and now I'm diabetic type 2. Everything's out of whack. Help me. So Bay, that's tricky when I'd have to talk to you about like what's going on to see if I could figure out like how to help you with that. With thyroidectomies, sometimes it takes them a while to get things balanced out, and I've seen cases with thyroidectomies where, and you got to think about this, like a lot of times a thyroidectomy, when they remove your thyroid, it's not like there's this, like, it's like a grape hanging on a vine and they can just like cut it off and it's like, okay, the thyroid's all gone. It's more like the thyroid's more like chewing gum stuck to the bottom of a shoe, and it's like pushed into the treads of the shoe, and they're like scraping it off, and there's like remnant thyroid tissue there. You know what I mean? And even if you're doing like the radioactive iodine and you're getting the cells of the thyroid are taking up the iodine, it doesn't get every single cell. It doesn't. So it's hard sometimes to get those levels balanced. And I've worked with people that have had really difficult times, and I've worked with people that have had, it's been pretty easy. So it's really, unique to the individual and also what else is happening. So I'm sorry that you're having those issues. Yeah, there's so many people with this, so many people with polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's just tragic. Let's see. Yeah, Rebecca says, I would love to know why I'm tired all the time. I get so frustrated because my doctor always tells me it's part of my depression diagnosis. Yeah, it's, man, fatigue is a really interesting one. I have done a ton of research on fatigue because it is probably the most common complaint that I get. It's like the most common complaints that I get that people typically are, there's three. There's fatigue, brain fog, or cognitive issues, right? Just lump all those together. And then weight resistance, weight loss, problems with body weight. Usually it's they can't lose weight. I do work with people, and I have worked with people that can't gain weight, definitely. But the majority of the people they can't lose weight, or they're gaining weight and they don't know why they're gaining weight. So the fatigue issue, though, a lot of those problems, I mean, brain fog, and the weight loss, inability to lose weight, those all, you've got to understand energy production at the core of that. Because if the person is, if you look at their diet and you look at what they're doing, and if it doesn't make sense why they're not losing weight based on, when you're just looking at like a calorie based equation, right? Like how many calories they're taking in and what they're doing, then there has to be a hormonal component to it. And usually you'll find, whenever I talk about this, I'll usually, you all have probably heard me say this. If you've watched my other videos, I'll say this quite often because I think it's really important to kind of anchor to this concept. You've got to consider what's going on a cellular level. Like, do the cells of the body have what they need to function and produce energy? And that comes back to things like, okay, do you have a high inflammatory level? If you do, that disrupts the physiology numerous ways, decreases hormonal sensitivity. It's going to create some problems for energy production because the cells of the body aren't going to be able to respond to the hormones, and especially thyroid hormone, optimally. So you're going to have some diminished sensitivity. And if you have diminished sensitivity to hormones, to your thyroid hormone, then you're going to have an inefficient or less optimal production of energy. Step one, is there inflammation? Step two, is there any blood sugar dysregulation? Are there fluctuations in blood sugar up or down? If you have high blood sugar and insulin resistance, then that has to be figured out. If there's low blood sugar and you're missing meals and the blood sugar swinging up and down, that's going to surge insulin, that's going to spike and disrupt cortisol production. It's going to create problems for all of your other hormones. It's going to create problems for your sex hormones. It's going to create problems for your thyroid hormone sensitivity and conversion. It's going to disrupt a lot of biochemical processes, and it's going to, listen, blood sugar problems have been called the great mimicker for many reasons, because it disrupts so much physiology that it can manifest as a number of different symptoms. So you have to consider it too, right? And then third thing, are you anemic? Is there anemia? So can you carry oxygen? Because remember, everything comes back to the cell. Like, does the cell have what it needs to produce energy? So inflammation decreases sensitivity to hormones. Blood sugar fluctuations create an issue where the cell can't get glucose or sugar into the cell to produce energy. So if your blood sugar is too high and you have insulin resistance, then you can't, the blood sugar is in the bloodstream, but you can't get it into the cell. If you're hypoglycemic and you don't eat enough, then the blood sugar is too low and you just don't have enough blood sugar in circulation to get into the cell to produce energy. Okay, see where I'm going with this? It's all like, okay, what is happening at the cell? And then you have to, third thing, right? The third thing is, do you have oxygen to help with energy production in the cell? Because the cell has to have glucose, which is your blood sugar, and it has to have oxygen, and it has to have thyroid hormone stimulation to produce energy, right? So if you can't burn the fuel, if you can't clear your blood sugar because you don't have steady glucose or you don't have good oxygen delivery, so if you're anemic or if you have a tendency or a shift towards anemia, where you're like iron and B12 and folate are really common there, but there are tons of reasons for anemia. Then you have to look at this and you have to say, okay, what's going on here, right? And why are these very foundational aspects of my physiology not optimal? And I see all the time where these things are occurring and people, they get blood work drawn and you can see it on their labs, like their doctor doesn't really mention it because they're not technically anemic, even though some of their ranges might be lab high or lab low. They don't fall into a technical diagnosis of anemia. And that's standard practice in medicine, is just to like watch it. If it's not something that, the doctor thinks is a big issue, they just watch it and they'll tell you everything's fine. And, from the perspective of what they're doing, it's not, there's not like a treatment or anything that can be done, but they're watching it and they don't necessarily tell you that all the time. And you look at it from a slightly different perspective, like an optimization perspective. They're looking at it from as their disease present perspective. And if there's no disease, then they're happy, right? But even if you don't feel good, when I'm looking at blood work, I'm looking at, are you optimal? Do you have optimal physiology? And if you're within the lab range, but you're not optimal, then that's something I want to happen. I want optimization. And that's because I'm looking at it slightly differently, and different tools, have different tools to work with people. They're looking for disease because they help people with disease. I don't necessarily help people with disease in that way. I work with people that have all kinds of labels that can be placed on what's happening with their body, but we're focused on optimizing whatever we find. We're not like looking at a disease and trying to identify a disease and what do we do about it. We're looking at what all's happening to the biochemistry of the body and how can we optimize that as much as possible. When you do that and you focus on the systemic health of the person, a lot of things really great can happen because it's all connected. So I know I digress there a bit, but I hope that makes some sense. That was fatigue, right? Fatigue. So just talking about fatigue, there's tons of different mechanisms. Thyroid. So again, thyroid physiology. If the thyroid can't stimulate cellular energy production, there are issues. I mean, that's going to be like the basis. I mean, the basics. I mean, you can look at adrenal physiology. You can look at sex hormone physiology. You can look at neurotransmitters and brain chemistry. You can look at the gut. You can look at a ton of different things. You can look at autoimmunity. These are all things that can impair and diminish energy production. You just really have to look at the whole person and try to understand what's happening and optimize what you find. Okay, I mean that's really the overall concept. But yeah, it's tough sometimes because fatigue has so many potential drivers, right? So many. Let's see. My doctor told me I was premenopausal, but I didn't have to do anything unless I have symptoms. You really, Pearl, you don't necessarily. I mean, if you're not having any symptoms, if you're, in an ideal world, women would be able to just go through menopause and not really notice a significant change in how they feel. That is not the most common experience, but there are people that don't really have many problems with it, but I think that there are more that do. Um, if your adrenal glands and your physiology is really is good, your overall systemic health is good. When the ovaries stop responding to the brain's signals to produce your hormones, then the adrenal glands will start taking over some of that role to some degree, and it makes that transition a little bit easier. It's different for everyone, but yeah, it is. If it really, hopefully you don't have to do anything. That's the dream, right? That's the dream. Uh, let's see what else. Um, Amy says, I definitely need to dig deeper. I've done everything I can with diet and environment. Just not right though with those things. Yeah, it's one of those things where there's absolutely nothing wrong with trying things to help yourself. If any of y'all are trying to figure out like what to do to help yourself, you should seriously, like, if you want to try probably the best trial and error based approach that I can come up with, you should join us with like our challenge that we're doing starting July 1st. That's a great dietary, lifestyle, and nutritional supplementation strategy that I put together to try to figure out how to cover all the basics that need to be done, for people to have good health. And if you're not improving with that, then there's definitely underlying things that need to be tested, quite frankly. Pearl says, "Hey, how do you feel about phentermine? She has me on this for energy. It's a stimulant. I mean, phentermine is used, for weight loss. I don't like it. I don't really like it a lot because it's not sustainable, right? I mean, let's say that, and it also will burn out your, listen, everything that you force, any kind of chemistry that's forced on the body, there will always be a side effect of that somewhere. You're going to deplete something somewhere. There's going to be a side effect. I mean, if you just look up like phentermine side effects, you'll see what some of the side effects that are documented in the pharmaceutical paper that comes with it. The paper detailing some of the side effects, but it's also not sustainable, right? I mean, so let's say you lose weight and you're on phentermine. What happens when you stop phentermine? You're going to gain the weight back because that artificial, that it's going to, more than likely than not, you're going to gain weight back because you're not taking that thing. We got to figure a better way. We got to find a better way to do it if possible, that's sustainable. That's really what, like, even with like the dietary approaches and things that I try to use, I'm just trying to teach people how to eat what we think is probably some of the best strategies for eating for life, to be healthy, vibrant, normal, and optimal body weight, right? Not these fad diets that are just designed to get a short-term weight loss and then you just rebound right back and you do more damage to yourself metabolically and you're more confused about what to do in the long term, in the long run. So it's just crazy. It's not good. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, if you guys can do testing, you definitely try to get testing done. Yeah, Tracy said, "Hey, what is ALT and ALS on blood tests? Those are, I think you're referring to the liver enzymes. They say that yours are high now. Yeah, liver enzymes. I always look at liver enzymes. If they're elevated, it depends on how high they are, but you got to talk to your doctor about the interpretation. I'll commonly see people that have high liver enzymes. If they're not like, multiples, like several times the lab range, you'll see that very commonly with like fatty livers. But if they're multiples of the lab range, then you want to get that figured out. They need to do a little bit further investigation if it's multiples of the lab range. You got to talk to your doctor about the interpretation of yours specifically. But, if I've seen them like multiples of the lab range, then I'm more concerned. But it's very common to see some elevation, with fatty livers in people. Okay, so all right, so it's 9:59. I think let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up and see. It's really not giving me any energy. It's my complaint. Okay, Pearl says that must be the phentermine, right? Um, I'm the woman with horrible Karen menopausal issues. I know. The course, I'm excited. Yeah, you guys, yeah, definitely join our challenge. I mean, for $1, it's seriously $1. It's guys, I'm telling you, it's a great dietary. Like with for $1, you get our transformation challenge like that we put together. It's like 6 weeks, 10 modules, and week 2, module 3 is our dietary strategies in there. Now you can purchase an additional dietary meal plan that has recently been put together that includes like smoothies and some other things that are not included in our standard one. But in our Facebook group, in the Transformation Community Facebook group, where we're going to be interacting when the challenge starts, there are already like 300 people in there, and we can give there's a lot of people that have had experience with other diets and variations of the diet, but the lifestyle things that I teach in there and that I try to get you to implement, plus we go through nutritional supplementation that should be, for most people are going to need a few things. Some people might need a slightly different variation, but usually the first thing that we're trying to work on, right, with people's health is to decrease inflammation, balance blood sugar, and improve their gut function. So a lot of the things that I just told you were like very foundational to everyone's physiology. Is there inflammation present? If there is, that's a problem, right? It disrupts everything. Is there blood sugar fluctuation? I mean, everything that we just talked about these are really core foundational aspects of optimal health. And so we can just start there making some assumptions and working using tools that we know help a lot of people to achieve better blood sugar regulation, to have a better immune regulatory response, and therefore help the immune system respond better to an inflammatory stressor or decrease inflammation. And then, improving the gut function and elimination is very important for so many different reasons, tons of different reasons, but it also that this sets the stage for the next phase where you can actually focus on detoxification and balancing hormones, which should be like you do that after you get some of these foundational things taken care of. It's a great program. So you guys should try it, go through it with us. Those plans going out. Pearl, you should if you guys joined our program at all. So Pearl, if you joined the transformation program, what you do is when you purchase that, you receive emails. There should be like 3 or 4 emails that you received with each thing that you purchased. And then also, after you made your purchase, there's a page. It's a thank you page at the end, and it's kind of like where it tells you like what you purchased, and then it gives you instructions. And there's 4 different things that you need to do. There's a few different accounts you need to set up, and then you need to set up. It gives you instructions and a link, and this is also in the emails that we sent. A link to the membership area where you create your username and password, and you can log in, and that's where everything is stored. Everything is within that membership area. The guidebooks for each week and each module, the video walkthrough of each of those guides. If you purchase an additional meal plan, that is in there as well. So you can there's a little section you click on, and it will open up, and you can click and download it. All those things are within that that members area. Okay, so everything is in there. Now, you do need to request to join the Transformation Community Facebook group, and you got to put in your name and email and everything so that we know we can verify your identity, because a lot of people find that group and just request to join it. So we don't let anyone in that doesn't answer the questions, because we can't go try to find you, right? You got to help us help you. So you can join that Facebook group. And then let's see, what else? You need to create a FullScript account, which is where our nutritional pharmacy, the supplement pharmacy, where you can get the exact supplements that I recommend are. And those are the things that you need to do. And then you can go ahead and you can start like actually watching some of the videos and preparing to start the program on July 1st. Or you can go ahead and you can get a head start. There's nothing wrong with you doing things now. So just to give you some ideas. Those are some of the things that we need to do. And if you need help, you go back to the page where if you just go to thyroidprogram.com, that's the page where you actually registered. And in the top right-hand corner, click on support. And you can put in your email and your question and submit a question. Okay? You can do that too. That's the best way to communicate with us. Some people like directly message our office, but we don't have like a huge team of people that are like checking, because we will probably get, I don't know, 50, maybe sometimes less, sometimes more messages through Facebook per day. And then we'll get emails. People will post, in the comments of like these videos, they'll post comments like thinking that we'll see them. We don't have a team that can do that. Like we have like, it's me and like 2 people. That's it. We're not like a huge team that, that can, respond to, like questions on like random places, right? So there has to be like a direct contact with us, and, you have to just, we're not aware when sometimes people don't realize, but when they post like questions, they don't realize that we don't see that. We're trying to ignore them. There's no way. I mean, and then when we're working, when we're like at the office, we're like full time, like seeing, working with our clients and really, really busy there. So we don't have time to like scour the internet. I'm not saying that you're doing that. I just want to be clear. Like just, if you can, just go to like click on support if you have, you need further clarification. But we are working through as people like purchase the programs and whatnot, we are working through, like, so it'll be Monday, but we're working through making sure that we've got people on a list, and we're trying to make sure that everyone has their account set up, and we're trying to help you guys help yourself. And if there's any kind of problems with any of it, we are working to try to make sure that everyone gets enrolled and can get started and has everything that they need. So if you have questions, definitely ask. We will do our best to help you. But you're guilty of that. It's okay. It's all right. Not a big deal. We know, and listen, we understand a lot of people that we work with are not like tech wizards or gurus. Not a big deal. We get it. And we don't hold that against you at all, because neither are we. That's the ironic thing. Neither are we. So we got it. We got you covered. Well, what I'll do, just look, and then, I think I did that with the supplements one. Yeah, just look, as you, if you signed up with the supplement, if you got the supplement discount, if you signed up with that, then the discount will be applied to the supplement dispensary. But as you're trying to as you look at the supplements, you should see like a mark, like it slashed the cost marked out, and then the discounted rate below that. So if you don't see that, do not purchase anything yet, because we will apply those as people are, as soon as we get back to the office on Monday. My staff and stuff will be going through, making sure that discounts are applied. So that because I don't want you guys to purchase things, because that's really outside of our hands if you purchase it. I mean, I guess you could send it back to them, or call them and maybe cancel it. But that's such an inconvenience. We don't want y'all to go through that. So anyway, I do appreciate you all. And if you need anything, please do let us know. If you have questions, comments, please leave them here. If you're trying to figure out some of these dietary things for yourself, join us for the Transformation Challenge. It starts July 1st. You can go to thyroidprogram.com and you can learn all about it. It's only $1, and I promise there's no catch to it. You guys join us and go through this. It's going to be, we have a meal plan. We have meal plans with shopping lists and recipes. We have a support group that's going to be part of that, where everyone's going to be there. Already like 300 people. Some of the people that I've worked with going through a variation before we did this challenge that have worked with me before are in there. Wonderful people, very knowledgeable, and and there's a lot of good information already in there that will help you. And then there's a good community of people there that will often help with questions, as we will. We'll help you there too. We'll by trying to answer some questions. And then there's like our supplementation pharmacy and access to the exact supplements that I've used with people clinically for 10 years. I give guidance on all that stuff. So you should join it. It's a great program if you're trying to figure out what to do to help yourself. It's a great place to start if you're going to try something before getting, maybe before getting some testing or working one-on-one with someone. Because I work with people around all over the place. Like we work with people via distance consulting across the U.S., other countries, and I always tell people when I work with people, we'll do a workup of their case, like I explained with this young lady that I was working with her polycystic ovarian syndrome. And just like with her, when we worked her case up, I said, look, there are a lot of different ways we can approach this. You can do diet and supplementation changes. There's some things that I can give you to do that won't cost you anything but food and maybe buying some supplements. Or we can do something like that, and you can do any degree of testing. And I gave her a tremendous number of options for testing that were basically good workups and better, and then the very best workup that I could think of. And I try to give people all those options and prioritize all the testing for them so that they can figure out what do they want to do, what can they afford to do, what's their budget like, and then they can go from there. But you can always start, if there's nothing else, you can always start with diet. You can always start with lifestyle. And just, and then it's really just focus on, if you have really limited resources, focus on the food, focus on your lifestyle, the supplementation even, if you can't do that, don't stress, just focus on the food and focus on the lifestyle. There's always a place to start. I promise you, there's always a place to start. So, those are some things to consider. But anyway, I'm going to get off here. I'm going to get to bed. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. I don't know if I'll talk to you tomorrow. I do have 1,000 things that I like this whole week, as I've been doing more live streams lately. Things kept popping in my head as I was talking to people. I'll have a conversation with someone and I'll be like, wow, I want to share that. And I'll jot it down, and I've got a huge list of different things I want to talk about. A lot of it's redundant to some degree, but, it's in a different context of a different story of someone else. So anyway, I appreciate y'all. I hope y'all have a wonderful, wonderful night, and I'll talk to you guys again very, very soon.